Hi everyone. Today I want to do a quick overview of the Flsun QQ-S Delta printer. I want to go over some of the things I noticed, some of the good things, some of the bad things, and how to address some of them. So first of all, I want to point out that this printer has a fairly small community compared to Ender or Prusa. That would mean you get less support than on any of those printers. The print quality is okay. Printed this at, I think, 100mm per second speed. So definitely not the greatest, but it's acceptable. Overall, I'd say it's a good printer to buy, but only if you can find it on sale. I wouldn't recommend paying full price for it. Now, what are the good things about it? It has fairly decent quality prints. It has a very small footprint for the size that you're getting, for the print size you're getting. Like, I have it on my desk, and as you can see, it's taking up, what, like 45 centimeters from the wall, and that's including power supply I have for my monitor and power coming out of it. So it's basically a 45 by 45 square that you would need, and in fact you do have some space behind there to put something else. It heats up pretty quickly, the bed and the extruder. One thing I would prefer is if they heat it up at the same time, because right now they don't. First the bed heats up and then the extruder. So that's, I think, is a bit unnecessary. It would be nice if they both heated up at the same time. It's pretty quiet as far as 3D printers go, but this is my first 3D printer, so I don't have a lot of experience with other ones, but from just visiting friends and everything I've noticed, this is a fairly quiet printer. It comes almost pre-built out of the box. You just have to put together basically the sides and tighten some screws, and that's about it. Takes maybe 25 to 45 minutes depending on how dedicated you are to actually assembling it and depending on the tool that you use. And apparently Flsun actually listens to the customer feedback or to the reviews, because as you notice on this model I don't have the power switch here at the front. It used to be kind of just an on-off switch that turns on the firmware, but did not actually cut the power. They moved it to the back, just like many people were doing themselves, so that's a nice thing. Now, on the downsides, the speed of the printer is nowhere near advertised. It's advertised as up to 300mm per second. But you cannot get usable prints over about 200mm. The support is mediocre. I emailed them a few times and basically got nowhere. It has very poor Octoprint support. You could get it to work, but it's pretty sketchy. Sometimes the print fails, sometimes it pauses, and I wouldn't rely on it. The parts, I would say, are pretty cheap. So, for example, the guide rails, you can easily bend it. I'm just lightly pushing with my finger, and as you can see, it moves. The gliders themselves, or whatever they're called, it's fairly cheap plastic. They're not that sturdy, and I can see them kind of wearing out with time. Yeah, the feeder motor is pretty noisy when it's when it's retracting. Some people saying on forums that you could fix it with a better driver. I have not tried replacing it. Maybe it'll work, maybe it won't, but I don't feel like spending more money. I think if you buy a printer that comes or is advertised as pre-assembled, you should not have to buy more parts to make it work as advertised. The feeder is very stiff, so to actually insert the filament, it takes a lot of force. And the SD card slot is a pain to reach. For whatever reason, they shoved it way in the back here. You can see the card is here, instead of putting it next to the screen. I have no idea why it's there, but that's what it is, and they still haven't moved it. Maybe in the future iterations they will, but for now it's kind of difficult. So some of the tips that might help you with the printer. First of all, loosen all the screws before assembling it. So some of the screws are already inserted when the printer comes in the box. So I would loosen all these screws. The screws here on top, all of that, I would loosen it. These screws, pretty much whatever screws you see, loosen them before assembling. Once you assemble it, then start tightening. I would tighten the belts first. When you tighten them to about when the bolt is flush with this knob, roughly that should be the tightness. It seems to work best. Then you start tightening all the screws around, and take care not to over tighten them. Once again, because the rails are so cheap, they will bend if you over tighten it, and then you'll get rattling noises, you'll get print errors, and the printer will wear out faster. Another thing, do not print over 200 millimeter per second. You'll just get really poor quality prints. Now, what I mean by bad quality prints, this is what I'm talking about. So for one, I printed this box at about 150 millimeter per second speed. So it's got a lot of issues, as you can tell. But it still works overall. Like the durability and other than aesthetics, it's still fully functional. And the dimensions, the size, it's pretty good. I did a test print and it was off by about 0.1 to 0.2 millimeters, so it's reasonable. Now, the printer is advertised to have a maximum speed of about 300 millimeters per second. This was printed at 200 millimeters per second. Extremely simple print. And as you can see, lots of issues. The print is just a box to store some parts. And as you can see, it came out terribly, and the print actually ended up failing, but it failed at like 95%, so I'm still able to use it. And also, this printer comes with the lubricant in the box. I suggest you use it. Put it generously on the rails, and it should help with the gliding and reduce any print errors and rattling. In order to help with that beeping noise on the feeder motor, on the retraction, you can set the retraction speed to 15 to 20, and I found that it helps. And again, only if you care about the beeping. If it's in another room where you don't mind the noise, then you can leave the speed at 30 and it prints just fine. Another thing that I would recommend is the printer comes covered with this foam and this tiny piece of plywood, but it works pretty well to reduce the noise if you just use that as the base for the printer. So it's sitting on my desk, and because of the foam, It doesn't transmit any of the vibrations into the desk, so it doesn't act as a giant speaker. I printed this calibration cube. It's supposed to be 3 centimeters on the side. So as you can see, it's off by about half a millimeter. Yeah, about half a mil, 0.8 mil. And it should be 2 centimeters tall. So it's pretty much right on. You can see there is a little, some imperfections here. So it's not perfectly flat, the sides. You can see this corner and some layers are coming off. And this was printed at 0.2 millimeter layer height, 100 millimeter per second speed. So it's definitely acceptable quality. You could do much better than this, but this is something I just wanted to run quickly. I was able to print this fidget or puzzle, whatever you want to call it. So as you can see, there are some defects, but it is fairly usable. It works as intended. It was a bit of a pain trying to rip off all the supports and clean out all these gaps, but overall the print is adequate. So I used 0.15 millimeter height, and I believe this was printed at 100 millimeter speed. So you can see not too many problems. Printed in this position, but if you turn it over, then you can notice the overhangs.